Periyapattinam, a major port for the Chinese ceramics trade in the 14th century. A video by Steve Gaskin. Hi, my name's Steve Gaskin. I'm president of the Asian Art Society of New England, and I study Chinese porcelain. I'd like to tell you today about how Periyapattinam was a very important port for the trade in blue and white porcelain in the 14th century. I've got some slides on it, and I'll share them with you now. By the middle of the 1300s, Genghis Khan's Mongol Empire had become the largest in the history of the world. It stretched from China to Hungary and from Siberia down to the northern borders of India and the Khmer Empire. The one good thing about this empire was that it did facilitate trade between East and West through the Silk Road, which went overland, and the spice route, which went by sea. In an era without refrigeration, spices were a critical item of trade. In addition to making food taste good and be edible, they had medicinal and cosmetic properties as well. The countries that engaged in the spice trade made enormous amounts of money. It was kind of like the Silicon Valley of today. But there were other things traded along with those spices in the ships that went along the spice route. And one of the most important was ceramics, Chinese ceramics. And in the middle of the 14th century, important innovations in Chinese ceramics were occurring. Around the year 1330, Chinese porcelain artists at Jingdezhen in China figured out how to take Persian cobalt and paint it under the glaze on their own brilliantly white porcelain. The result was blue and white porcelain, one of the most successful new product introductions in history, which dominated the market for 300 years after its introduction. The era from 1279 to 1368, when the Mongols ruled China, was called the Yuan dynasty, and thus this type of porcelain is called Yuan blue and white porcelain. It was developed and perfected in a period of about 20 years. And what's most extraordinary about it is that the artists that did this not only created this type of porcelain, but the painting they did on the porcelain was better than anyone else has ever done ever since. Using a limited set of motifs and endless variations, the talented artists at Jingdezhen created the beautiful Yuan blue and white porcelain. This porcelain was a major money maker for the Mongol Empire, and it was traded throughout the China Sea, the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, all the way from Egypt to Korea, from Africa to India, everywhere. Wealthy aristocrats and emperors treasured this porcelain, and only they could afford it. The cobalt used on this porcelain was, ounce for ounce, more expensive than gold. So you can imagine that a piece like this, which is mostly blue, all painted blue with the white left in reserve, was a very expensive and treasured piece of porcelain. Yuan blue and white porcelain came in many forms. This is a Mei Ping, or plum blossom vase. It was used to store wine, people think. It has a number of motifs arranged from top to bottom in a series of horizontal bands. The top band is lotus panels. The next band is lotus flowers and leaves in a scrolling pattern. The main band is peonies, flowers and leaves, again in a scrolling pattern. Then a classic scroll, and then more lotus panels at the bottom. It looks a little bit like a Persian rug has been transferred onto the vase in a way, with all the flowers and arabesques. But the interesting thing is, the Persians got it from the Chinese, and the Chinese got it from the Indians. The Indians gave it to the Tibetans with Tibetan Buddhism, and the Mongol Empire's rulers were Tibetan Buddhists. So the motifs on this very important type of Chinese porcelain can ultimately be found at their source in India. You can see these motifs again on this jar, which was found in Constantinople in the 1920s, and it's now in the British Museum. Again, you see the lotus panels, the peony scrolls. Here's some chrysanthemum scrolls added beneath the peony scrolls, and then the lotus panels at the bottom. But up at the top, there's two other interesting motifs. One of them is mythical animals from China, the qilin and the phoenix. And then at the top, underneath the rim, we see waves, scrolling waves, which kind of represent the fact that these porcelains were meant to travel far across the ocean all over the world. You might think, well, porcelain, it's kind of a mass-produced commodity, isn't it? No one cares about it very much. Why is blue and white porcelain important anyway? Well, take a look at this jar, this close-up of the same jar from Constantinople that's now in the British Museum. Look at the exquisite painting of the waves, of the qilin, of the Taoist and Buddhist treasures in the lotus panels. It's just extraordinary. Again, no one has painted porcelain this well ever since. And there's only about 200 intact examples of Yuan blue and white porcelain, despite its trade all over the world. It's very rare. Here's an example of another jar with a dragon on it and cloud collars, which came from Buddhist priests' outfits again. And it is in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. We don't know where it was found. Was it found in India, in Persian Gulf, in Constantinople? No one knows. But it's a very beautiful piece. Here we have another lovely piece. This one's a flask, not a jar, but it still has the cloud collars. It has the dragon. It has the waves. And the dragon's chasing the flaming pearl of wisdom. It's an exquisite piece, and these are very rare. For many years, scholars thought that the largest collections of Yuan blue and white were in the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul, the old Ottoman Empire palace, and then in Tehran, there was a large collection from Shah Abbas's Ardabil Shrine in northwestern Iran. Those gave people the idea that this sort of Yuan blue and white was destined chiefly for the Middle East and for Islamic countries. This is a beautiful piece, again with a qilin and the peony scrolls around the cavetto of the porcelain. And here's a double gourd vase from the Topkapi Palace collection. It's about, well, it's almost a meter tall. It's an enormous double gourd vase, exquisitely painted with an all-over design of peony scrolls. The metal top was added later by the Ottomans in tribute to the beauty of the porcelain. Intact pieces of Yuan blue and white may be very rare today. As I said, there's only about 200 of them. But broken pieces of Yuan blue and white, which we call shards or shards, can be found throughout Asia and around the Indian Ocean. You see the red dots in this chart. They show locations where Yuan blue and white porcelain shards have been found. Muslim rulers in the Middle East and India really treasured blue and white porcelain. And one way we know this is from miniature paintings at the time, which show sultans and their courtiers eating food from bowls made of Chinese porcelain. Further evidence of the widespread use of Chinese porcelain comes from the diaries of Ibn Battuta, the famous Muslim traveler from the 1300s. The colored parts of this map show the various sections of the Mongol Empire in the mid-1300s. And the red lines show all of the travels of Ibn Battuta between 1325 and 1354. He started out way over in Cordoba and went to Western Africa, Mali, then throughout the Persian Gulf, up into Russia, and then down to India, where he served as a minister for the Sultan of Delhi for a while. And then he was assigned to be his ambassador to China. So off he went down to the south of India, and then through the Straits of Malacca and up to the port of Quanzhou in China, eventually reaching the Mongol capital at Khanbalik. As I noted, for many years, people thought that Yuan Blue and White's chief destination was the Middle East, to Islamic rulers in Egypt, Turkey, and Persia. But it turns out that recent discoveries have shown that really that's wrong. There were very important collections in India and Southeast Asia, and I'd like to talk about the one for India since that's more to our purpose. In 1960, there was a collection of porcelain that was dug up by the horticultural branch of the Archaeological Survey of India on the palace grounds of Feroz Shah Kotla in Delhi. They dug it up, they thought it was Mughal blue and white porcelain, and they forgot about it for a number of years. But eventually, in 1976, Ellen Smart, who's shown here, wrote a paper for the Transactions of the Oriental Ceramic Society regarding that collection of porcelain. She looked at the motifs on it, and as you can see from the lotus panels and the lotus scrolls there, and I think we can see a fish in the foreground, that this is Yuan Dynasty blue and white porcelain, and the largest collection of Yuan Dynasty blue and white porcelain in the entire world. It was very important. In 2012, I went on business to New Delhi, and to the despair of my poor suffering tour guide, Bindu Lal, I said the main thing I want to see is the Yuan Dynasty blue and white porcelain stored in the Purana Kila in Delhi, in the offices of the Archaeological Survey of India. But by some miracle, she got me in, and here I am with my friend Sarjun Prasad, who's next to me, standing next to this porcelain. And you'll notice there's a lot of it, but it's broken. And it's broken because it was broken before it was buried in about 1374. There are about 67 pieces in the Delhi collection, making it about twice as large as the ones in Istanbul or Tehran. It's a very important collection, and even though the pieces are broken, many are intact enough that you can still see how exquisitely they're painted, like this dish with a fish on it and water weeds. So the question is, how did that porcelain reach the Feroz Shah Kotla, the fort of Sultan Feroz Shah, in the 1300s? By what route? It could have come from over in Bengal or Orissa. It could have come from the Coromandel coast, like Nagapattinam in Tamil Nadu. And we see a Chinese pagoda that stood until the mid-1800s in Nagapattinam here. Or it could have come from a port way in the south of India, such as Periyapattinam. And we see the Mosque of Periyapattinam here. Although today it's a rather small town, Periyapattinam, whose very name means great port, was one of the most important ports for the Chinese ceramics trade in the mid-1300s. Here we see the Kapalaru Urani, a large tank or reservoir, which once upon a time was connected to the coast via a channel, and in the 1300s, ships could come in, offload and onload their trade wares, and be on their way. This made the Periyapattinam the great port that it was. Evidence of the importance of Periyapattinam as a major port in the Chinese ceramics trade in the 1300s comes from the writings of Ibn Battuta, who passed through there on his way to China during his travels. It was also mentioned by a couple of Chinese authors on the Chinese porcelain trade at the time. But there are archaeological traces as well. In 1985, Dr. Subbarayalu, a professor of archaeology at Tamil University, discovered Chinese ceramic shards in Periyapattinam. He brought back in 1987 a couple of Japanese scholars, one of whom was Noboru Karashima. They went around the town and found roughly 500 pieces of Chinese ceramic shards on the ground surface in the village. They also dug 7 test pits in the western part of the village. And they, along with their other Indian professors who helped them, found in total about 1,000 Chinese ceramic shards, 10% of which were Yuan blue and white, and most of which were green Celadon porcelain. Here's an illustration of some of the Chinese ceramic shards found in Periyapattinam by Dr. Karashima and his Indian colleagues. You can see that some of them are Celadons, that greenish type of porcelain which dominated the Chinese ceramics trade at the time. But at the bottom right, we do see some of the telltale lotus panels of Yuan blue and white, which makes Periyapattinam very extraordinary because though Chinese porcelain shards have been found in many locations throughout India, very few locations have Yuan blue and white porcelain. Most of them have blue and white porcelain from the 16th and 17th centuries when the Portuguese and Dutch were engaging in the trade. Thank you very much for listening to this brief introduction to the history of Periyapattinam and its relationship to the Chinese ceramics trade in the 1300s. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you find any Chinese ceramics shards around town, or you just want to learn more, may I suggest that you contact Aprajita Sharma of the Archaeological Survey of India. Her email is shown below. And of course, you're always welcome to contact me, Steve Gaskin of the Asian Art Society of New England. And my email is shown below as well. Again, thank you very much for listening. Bye.